First, we find it difficult to reconcile the proposed substantial capital reduction soon after the transaction is completed, with Income's representations to MCCY during the corporatisation exercise that it was aiming to build up capital resources and enhance its financial strength. As I had explained, as part of that exercise, Income had sought and obtained an exemption to allow it to carry over a surplus of $2 billion to the new corporate entity. The proposed capital reduction runs counter to the premise on which the exemption was given. If not for the ministerial exemption in 2023, Income Co-op's accumulated surplus of some $2 billion would have gone to the CSLA after being wound up, to benefit the co-op movement in Singapore as a whole. MCCY has not seen any arrangement within the present transaction to account for the estimated $2 billion surplus that was carried over to the new corporate entity due to the exemption. There is no clarity on how this sum will be directed towards advancing Income's social mission. Second, MCCY is not satisfied that Income will be able to continue fulfilling its social mission after the proposed transaction. There are no clear binding provisions or structural protections in the deal to ensure that Income's social mission will be discharged. It is also not clear what Income might do after the capital extraction, for example, to adjust or trim its insurance portfolio, and what impact this could have on policyholders.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I welcome Minister's statement on blocking the proposed deal and the government's emphasis that at the heart of this decision is about NTUC Income being able to serve its social mission. As such, can I ask Minister to clarify upon reflection if NTUC Income should have been allowed to be a corporate and be given an exemption from compliance with Section 88 of the Cooperative Societies Act? And if so, will MCCY consider further mechanisms to be built in, since subsequent corporate exercises could alter or weaken this social objective?
So I've explained in some detail the background to the corporatisation exercise as well as the exemption that was granted in 2022 and 23. Let me just reiterate that we felt that was suitable at the point in time because Income is involved in the insurance business. It essentially is competing with large players around the world and in Singapore. And it also has to maintain a substantial capital base. I mean, that's the requirements under the Insurance Act and by MAS. And the current cooperative, or at that time, current cooperative structure was not conducive to it. For example, it made investments or strategic partnerships with a co-op less attractive. There were some restrictions on how much dividend could be declared out of which year's profits, and there was also a limit to it and so on. These limitations don't apply to a corporate entity. And so these, amongst others, were the reasons why we supported Income when they approached us and discussed their plans with them. In terms of the exemption, as I explained, if Income was going to be wound up and no longer continuing with its business, obviously Section 88 would apply. It applies in all other cases. The fund with the surplus after you pay off liabilities will be put into the CSLA. But as I explained, this was not a scenario where Income was going to be liquidated, wound up, and cease its business. In fact, it was carrying on the same business with the assurance that it would see to its social mission in a sense, a new skin in the corporate vehicle setup, but continuing with the same business fundamentally. And so in that respect, taken as a whole, the exemptions were considered to be suitable and granted so that Income can carry on and will be able to take advantage of the capital surpluses in its new vehicle. In terms of future steps that Mr. Goh mentioned, I mentioned in my speech that we would look at the possibility of amendments to the CSA to look at such scenarios where a cooperative converts into a corporate vehicle, and what are some of the measures that can be taken. We'll explore all of this when we look at the CSA in detail.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So I'm very surprised to hear this announcement by the government today when it had defended the sale of income insurance to Allianz so strongly during the 6th August sitting of Parliament. I think I heard Minister Tong say earlier that MCCY was concerned that there were no structural protections in the deal to ensure that Income could continue its social mission. But the fact that Allianz would have a majority stake in income insurance under the proposed deal was known at least since 17 July 2024, when Income first made its public announcement. Was this not a concern to MCCY in August? Be that as it may, what structural protections does MCCY expect to be put in place in order for any sale of a co-op or social enterprise to proceed? For example, will it be the case that co-ops or social enterprises will not be allowed to sell a majority stake in their shares to an entity that does not have an explicit social mission?
Minister Tong.
Mr. Giam, I spent quite a bit of my speech explaining the sequence of events and explaining what we knew as of 6 August and what we knew after 6 August. I hope you've taken that into consideration and into account. And what we knew after 6 August allowed us to look at it cumulatively. On its own, as I mentioned in my speech, losing board majority, losing shareholder majority were not itself factors which allowed us to reach a view that it was not in the public interest. And you appreciate that it is a balancing consideration. On the one hand, there's a strategic interest in wanting the partnership to strengthen income, to ensure that it will remain competitive. Yes, you lose board majority and you lose shareholding majority, but you take that in the round and on balance. But what we discovered after 6 August, with a substantial capital extraction, shortly after the exemption was granted in 2023, of such a substantial amount, were factors which then tipped the balance. And then we said, as I mentioned in my speech, cumulatively, these factors caused us to have pause, and we decided to review in greater detail, and we realized that this was not something that we should see through as a matter of public interest. So I hope that explains the sequence of events, and that Mr. Giam doesn't see the shadows which don't exist in this case. It's about what we knew on the 6th and what we said, and even if you look at the Hansard transcripts, what we said on the 6th was in relation to overarching purpose and strategic intent of Income looking for a partner. Not so much that we knew the terms of this and we were talking about the terms of this on the 6th of August. I hope that makes that clear for Mr. Giam. As to what would work, I had ventured that in my answer to Mr. Liang earlier. For example, you might ring-fence products using proceeds or surplus from the cooperative as one example. Or you might have terms contractually, even without majority shareholding, which oblige the parties to operate in a particular way to fulfill social mission. So these are some examples of what it might be. But as to what exactly such a deal should look like, I think that would be speculative, and I won't go into that. If the parties decide at some juncture that they want to reconsider this proposal and resubmit a proposal, we'll consider it afresh at that point in time.
And my clarification for the Minister for MCCY is, I think I heard the Minister say earlier, this is in relation to the exemption granted to the 2023 Gazetted exemption order. I believe the Minister mentioned that there's some flexibility needed for I guess, to allow to use the surplus to achieve the mission. And I just wanted the Minister to clarify that no conditions were imposed on the use of the surplus in that respect. Thank you.
I had answered Ms. Her's question, and when I used the word flexible, it was in the context of my answer to Mr. Chua's query about the extent to which social mission might evolve. And that was when I used the word flexible. But in the context of the exemption, there was a series of discussions. I mentioned in my speech on Monday that we engaged with Income over a period of time. We exchanged views. They sent various letters representing their position, and it was on this basis that the corporatisation and the exemption was granted.